Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the Finding You podcast. My name is Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Thursday, August 21st, 2025. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about parts work. I'm going to be talking about it in the context of course, internal family systems, which is a new idea around parts work. But part of what I want to do is teach you why it's helpful to look at and understand ourselves through this lens of the parts that we carry around inside of us, whether it be an inner child, whether we're talking about the Greek gods and goddesses that we carry around inside of us, those energies, whether we're identifying with cartoon characters or characters from a movie, or of course, in the more formal way, the way we think about it in something like internal family systems or family therapy. So I'm going to be talking about that tonight. And I should announce that I want to say welcome to our inner circle. This is the very first broadcast where the inner circle are the attendees. So welcome to the broadcast. So happy to have you as part of this family. Before I get into tonight's broadcast, I just want to talk about our housekeeping items. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. And if you're interested in doing a deep dive into your own work, in fact, and understanding the parts of yourself, the energies, the conflicts that are moving around within you, our offering of Finding You, our Finding You therapy program, our flagship is the individual intensive that we call Finding You. The next available option is September 3rd through 7th. I believe there's one spot left for that. So if you're interested, jump on that quickly. We also have an online offering September 19th through 21st. It's about a half of the time and about a third of the cost, and you don't have to travel. After that, it's October 1st. I think it actually might be October 3rd, that first Wednesday in October, November 5th, December 3rd. For all other inquiries about private intensives for couples and family, any questions you have, any suggestions for the podcast, you can go to our website or you can email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. That's info@findingyouprograms.com. We have just launched something new also as part of this new inner circle process where we have support groups for our alumni intensives, for our intensives alumni. So if you're interested in getting support, we had our first group last night. It was wonderful. Our next offering will be September 17th, October 15th. Again, go to our website to learn more about that. If you're looking for a coach or a therapist who works in this attachment-based, this analytically informed model, the kind of things that I teach, then you can go to our website or email us at our email info@findingyouprograms.com and seek for a therapist, look for a therapist or a coach who can help and support you on your personal journey. I'm going to be in New York at the Omega Institute this fall, October 12th through 17th, with my daughter Emma Reedy June. That's October 12th through 17th. This is called the Audacity to Be You workshop. So if you're looking for something that's not quite as expensive or intense as the intensives, but you want the psychoeducation and the exercises, this is a wonderful opportunity. It's different than our Finding You intensive. This is going to be a mix of experiential exercises, of psychoeducation, of lectures, and of course, it's hosted at the beautiful Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York. If you're interested, go to the Omega website at eomega.org. That's eomega.org. Click on the workshops tab, and then you can find me under the Audacity to Be You workshop for this fall. Like I've mentioned, the Inner Circle has been launched. I'm very excited. This is a subscription and a support of the Finding You podcast. So if you're interested in attending these live broadcasts, you can subscribe monthly or yearly. And if you are a Finding You alumni, you'll be automatically enrolled in these. So with that, I'm going to get into tonight's broadcast, tonight's topic. I want to start off, first of all, with this idea of one of the main reasons why understanding ourselves as parts. You've heard the phrase, you've used the phrase in your life. Part of me feels sad. Part of me feels relieved. Part of me feels fill in the blank. This is an ability to hold aspects, energies, motivations, feelings inside of us without judgment. This is an ability to look at ourselves and to say, I can hold two, at times, contradictory feelings or energies at the same time. That gives me permission. And because it's just a part of me, I don't necessarily need to identify with it, to over-identify with it, so much so that I judge it. I've shared the quote in recent weeks I heard Ram Dass talking about, and this is a little bit of a paraphrase of what he said, but ultimately what he said, to become enlightened, one must learn to judge nothing. We just observe it as it is without putting a judgment on it. Carl Jung explained that most people have a difficult time thinking, and that's why they like to judge. We judge things because it gives us a sense of control. It reduces some sense of fear of things being out of control or unmanageable in our lives. So judgment is a way to bring things within a categorization that makes sense to us, that we can explain, that we can comprehend. It gets rid of the complexities, the nuances, the paradoxes, the ambiguity. So in essence, the first idea in parts work is that we just see it as it is. You know, whether we're talking about the ego or the manager part of us or the exile or the shadow or the Apollo drive in us or the Athena drive in us, we're talking about things that are just what they are. And we're using metaphor to do it so as to take away some of the sting of judgment, that I don't want to have that aspect in me. In narrative therapy, we talk about it, they talk about it in terms of externalizing it, by giving it a name, by giving it an energy. We take away the fact that it's us, that it's who we are. In dialectical behavioral therapy, they emphasize this importance of holding two opposing ideas or truths simultaneously. In dialectical behavioral therapy, this idea of dialectics is used to help individuals find balance between acceptance and change, recognizing that both things can exist, even if they seem exclusive of each other. I can love you and be grateful for you as my parent, and I can also hold my hurt and my anger for some of the ways that you treated me. I can be scared, and at the same time, I can want to move forward. And of course, the most important part of parts work, in my opinion, is that it is really how we experience ourselves. I think any kind of good therapy is more about reminding us of something that we knew or know deeply inside of us. That's why some people, even with broadcasts like the ones that I do here, can write to me and say, I feel seen. When in reality, I'm not having any experience with somebody firsthand. I'm just talking about my own experience, my own journey, my own theoretical orientation and conceptualization. But by speaking things that resonate deeply within you, you feel seen, you feel heard, not so alone. I remember at the launch of the Journey of the Heroic Parent, when I was on a news broadcast, one of the news anchors that was interviewing me said that it was like reading a book that with ideas and concepts, quotes that she had never heard before, but immediately after reading them, they became familiar. They make sense to her. In Buddhism, we talk about it in terms of the middle path, which refers to this balanced approach that avoids extremes, right? Duality. It is to say, I am not one way or the other. I am some mix of the two. I am somewhere in between. Both dialectics and the middle path encourage individuals to embrace complexity and contradictions. Instead of choosing one extreme, like total acceptance or complete change, these ideas, these philosophies, approaches promote finding a harmonious middle ground that acknowledges and honors both sides. And when we start to talk about parts, right? When we start to talk about the inner child, which is just an idea or a concept of understanding some deep lost truth, some historical part of ourselves, we're really using metaphor. We're trying to explain something that is beyond what a simple explanation might provide. We're speaking to something beyond what we see visible, right? We can't see the ego. We can't see the firefighter that they talk about in internal family systems, but we can feel its energy. We know when it shows up. I took this quote from The Power of Myth, which is a wonderful series that you can buy on Audible. You can also watch the video. If you Google the Power of Myth with Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell, it's this dialogue, this 6 or 7 part series that he did just before he died that really kind of gives an overview of his work. And at one point, Bill Moyers asked Joseph Campbell, he said, so whatever it is that we experience, we have to express it in language that is just not up to the task, not up to the occasion. And Campbell responded, that's it. That's what poetry is for. These ideas, that's why mythology is so important in psychotherapy. That's why storytelling, parables, analogies are so helpful, because so much of the human experience falls short when it's put into explanatory language. Jamie Gill wrote in one of her books that to explain falls short, so we must evoke the emotional experience that's relevant by using story, by using myth, by using metaphor. I love this idea in Joseph Campbell that he talks about both in his seminal work, the hero with 1,000 faces, but also in the power of myth. He said mythology, in other words, is psychology. Mythology is psychology. Misread, misunderstood as biography, history, and cosmology. Sometimes we think about the fact that we think of primitive cultures like the Greeks and the Romans, and we think, they were so ignorant to assume that the lightning in the sky was the result of Zeus's anger. That a fire was some god or a goddess that was being angry. Some storm was a god or a goddess being angry. But what they really knew, and we are too really concrete to understand, was that this is a way of describing their psychology. They were describing a spiritual or a psychological practice by identifying with these gods, which help different energy. And the different thing between the Greeks and the monotheistic gods that we know today is the Greeks were not necessarily perfect. The Greek gods weren't perfect, just as we human beings aren't perfect. One of, I think, the greatest limitations of modern monotheistic religions is that the gods of monotheism often don't make mistakes. And there's nothing more human than making a mistake. We have very little example to none of gods or goddesses apologizing, for example. And yet that is one of the tools and relationships that might be right there at the top of the most important things that we can learn to do. So we have no divine example of an apology. But in cultures where the gods are imperfect, the gods can make mistakes, they can have jealousies, anger, right? They can act out of revenge. We start to identify with parts of ourselves. We stop imagining ourselves to be nothing but good, or that the goal is to be nothing but good. And we begin to integrate and to work with the God energy, the metaphorical energies, the parts of ourselves, if you will. So parts work goes back all the way into recorded history. It is a way of understanding our own personal psychology. Speaking of early parts work, in internal family systems, which has revived, reinvited this discussion about parts. It's what's making it popular today. In internal family systems theory, and in also Virginia Satir, one of the early family therapists, individuals are viewed as having multiple parts that contribute to their overall identity. This also aligns with Jung's idea of the self and the shadow, where the parts of the self are seen as a complex interplay of various components moving within us, including the conscious ego and the unconscious aspects of ourselves, like the shadow, the parts of ourselves where we exile, right? We deny and repress parts of ourselves that our culture, that our community, that our family finds unacceptable. And we shove those under the bed and into the closet, where in essence, they become monsters, right? The monster under the bed is the angel that we banished, it was once said. Going back even further with Greek gods and archetypes, as I mentioned, the ancient Greeks personified various aspects of the human experience through their gods and goddesses. Each deity represented different traits, emotions, or experiences, like Athena for wisdom, Dionysus for ecstasy, or Ares for war. This allows individuals to identify with these gods, reflecting their own internal experience, their own struggles and attributes. Just as parts work encourages individuals to acknowledge and integrate different facts of themselves, the Greeks used their pantheon to explore and understand the complexity of human nature. For example, a person might resonate with the conflict between the rationality of Athena and the impulsiveness of Ares, mirroring the internal conflicts addressed in psychotherapy. Isn't that powerful? To realize that that's what this religion, this practice, this belief system served? It served for us to identify with parts of ourselves that were mysteriously working, at times in concert and at times in conflict with each other. Both approaches, modern IFS and Virginia Satir's work, as she talked about parts in the 1970s, both of these approaches emphasize that understanding ourselves involves recognizing and integrating various aspects of our psyche. The Greeks provided a narrative framework through mythology, while modern psychology offers therapeutic techniques to explore these dynamics. Even the inner child, the idea of an inner child, is parts work. As discussed by John Bradshaw, maybe made famous by him, and in Gestalt therapy, the inner child represents the part of ourselves that retains feelings, memories, and experiences from childhood. It embodies innocence, creativity, and vulnerability, but it also can carry pain and the unmet needs of our early years. When we begin to go back to the inner child, it's a simple way of saying we're doing trauma work or shadow work or parts work. It is one way of understanding what is living inside of our body, right? Bessel van der Kolk, in his famous book, The Body Keeps the Score, is talking about the inner child in a sense also. He's saying, what does our history, when somebody cuts me off at the store and I blow up with anger and rage, what does that represent? What is my inner child telling me? And in that example, it might simply be that when somebody doesn't see me, both literally as cutting me off, or metaphorically as not listening and resonating with me, the inner child is full of rage, full of anger, full of despair. Essentially, inner child work is the process of getting in contact with your authentic self. In parts work, in IFS, it would be called the self. Understanding your core feelings, struggles, and dilemmas, since these are underneath many of our interactions and are at play when we struggle in relationships. In essence, these conceptualizations, be it the ancient mythological framework or contemporary psychological models, serve to help individuals navigate their internal landscapes, reflecting on the multifaceted nature of the human experience without shame and judgment. So there are many ways in which parts work serve us. I think first, and maybe most importantly, is it resonates, it tells a story, right? It creates a scene that resonates with how we experience ourselves. Complex, nuanced, not all one thing or the other. I think maybe the most impact that it has on us is that it reduces shame. There's no judgment about these parts. They just exist in all of us. And the facilitation of parts work creates a dialogue instead of suppression. You see, when people go to have symptoms treated, they're in essence taking the risk of suppressing, of creating more exiles. I don't want my anger I don't want to be angry at my parents anymore. That kind of idea is a slippery slope, a dangerous idea. The anger is a message from part of you, whether it be the exile, the inner child, right? The Aries energy that's working inside of you. It is a message that we learn to have a dialogue with and to understand. When you make friends with your demons instead of exiling them, they give you a great treasure. Joseph Campbell said that when we meet the dragon inside of us, when we confront the dragon, when we at times either defeat it or some people say make peace with it, it gives us the treasure that it was hoarding. So if we go to therapy just to get rid of our anxiety, our drinking, our sexual acting out, our depression, right? All of those things can cause a lot of problems in our lives, of course. But if we go just with the stated goal of getting rid of these things, we miss the wisdom that those aspects of us have to offer. Charles Bukowski said, don't try to fight your demons, listen to them. Ask them questions. Ask them about the scratches on their hands and face. Some of them are very nice. And the wisdom that they have to share will be absolutely liberating to you. They are parts of you that are asking for attention. I wrote in The Journey of the Heroic Parent, in the piece that I wrote around behavioral change, and I had to write some chapter in a parenting book about behavioral change, but the epigraph and the first page of that, I said, if we just go about trying to change our child's behavior without listening first to what that behavior is trying to tell us, we miss the opportunity for the discovery, for the gold that is beneath, for the wisdom that is there. So we learn through parts work to have a dialogue instead of suppression. We learn psychological flexibility. We learn to be not so rigid about this is an all one thing or another, this idea that I'm either good or bad. I'm either angry or sad. I'm either grateful or angry and hurt by my parents, when in actuality, most people, almost everybody's experience is that you can be absolutely both. When I was writing about the same kind of idea a couple of years ago, I said, speaking about Disney cartoons and the archetypes and the messages that they share, I shared the story at my most recent intensive that when my oldest son, who is now 32, was about 5 years old, we were watching Disney's Captain Hook. And he paused the videotape back then. He paused the videotape and looked at me and said, "Dad, Captain Hook isn't bad. He's just sad, right?" And I was so pleased to hear that. I said, "That's exactly right. The things that we do to protect ourselves from fear hurt others. That's the message." So when thinking about Disney cartoons or fairy tales, the trick is not to teach children to identify with the hero or the princess or even the villain. The message in these stories is that you are all of the characters. The magic of stories like these and fairy tales is in integrating and relating to all the parts of the self. That really is the work. That's what we're trying to do here. Freud's model of the psyche, the id, the superego, the ego, can be seen as an early form of parts work, where each component represents different drives, energies, like I said, functions of the mind. Carl Jung, a contemporary and at first a student of Freud's, introduced the idea of the psyche being made up of different components such as the persona, the shadow, that unconscious part that we put all the exiled parts, the anima or the animus, the neglected male or female aspects of ourselves, masculine, I should say, or feminine parts of ourselves that we find in our spouses often, and various archetypes. Jung's idea of the self includes integrating these different parts of the personality. In Gestalt therapy, Fritz Perls, the founder of Gestalt therapy, emphasized awareness and integration of various aspects of the self. He would have people talk to an empty chair to encourage them to have a dialogue with the different parts of themselves. So at our intensives, if you're struggling with shame, we might put shame in a chair and have you have a dialogue with it. I had a dialogue with a client today about one of the voices that they carried around inside of their head. In fact, what he said to me during our session was, "It's not really other people now. Now it's me." And all that's happened is he's internalized the external voices inside of himself, and he thinks it's him. And by naming these parts and sort of externalizing them, we become the observer, as they say in some philosophies. We adopt the observer mind. Eckhart Tolle talks about this. We adopt this observer mind where we can see the various aspects, drives, energies inside of us and how they're working. In Eric Berne's transactional analysis, he describes the ego states of the parent, adult, and the child inside of us, which can be different, viewed as different parts of the selves. So this is the idea that is now being made popular by internal family systems. This idea that these parts of us are absolutely a way of understanding, of having a dialogue, of learning, of listening. Right? I shared in my second book that I was struggling to confess something to my therapist. And she said, if you came in here telling me that you were in love with a chicken, she used a different word, but she essentially said, if you told me that you were in love with a chicken, I would assume you have a good reason for that, and I would just want to understand. You see, she's encouraging a dialogue. Somebody comes and they say, I want to forgive my abuser. And I say, let's slow down, because that forgiveness still might be serving you. Well, yeah, my abuser shows up to family parties. Nobody in my family believed what I reported happens, and so my grandfather shows up to the family party. And then my thought is, well, that lack of forgiveness might be the best way to protect yourself, to keep distance, to not become a victim again. When I first learned about parts work, it was through the work of Virginia Satir, who was one of the founding theorists in family therapy. She believed that individuals have different parts or aspects of themselves that influence their behavior and actions. She emphasized the importance of recognizing these parts in order to understand yourself, to develop healthier relationships. She talked about the relationship between our self-esteem and making friends with these parts, right? My book says Learning to Love Your Horrible Rotten Self as a subtitle. I don't really think it's a horrible rotten self. It's just what you and I have been taught to believe about those aspects of ourselves that the big people around us when we were young found inadmissible. Satir specifically identified specific roles that members often assume: blamer, placater, computer, distractor, victim, persecutor, hero. These roles can be seen as different parts that individuals play inside family dynamics, and that becomes something that somebody over-identifies with. If you are the hero in your family, that means that you have over-identified with the heroic part of yourself. And the cost of that is that you deny and don't give attention to the vulnerable, scared part of yourself, the hurt part of yourself, the part of yourself that needs help, for example, the part of yourself who has no capacity to sit with somebody's pain because you want to come on your white horse and rescue them. So through her techniques, Satir aimed to help clients recognize and harmonize these internal parts. That's the work, is what is going on inside of me? Where did it come from? But maybe most importantly, what is happening inside of me? And if I am always the victim, that means that you are always the persecutor. And that means that we need a hero to rescue me. And I've said before, I said this to somebody today, you are the hero that you are waiting on. You are the medicine. Your soul, yourself, is the medicine that you're seeking. This is a pilgrimage back to you. And the one who's going to rescue you from your predicament is you. More about Satir. She had this thing called a parts party. We practiced this in graduate school. Participants in this are encouraged to identify different parts of themselves that influence their thoughts and feelings and behaviors. These might include parts related to emotions, ways of coping, or specific roles that they play in their lives. The therapist creates a safe and open environment. Sometimes they use chairs or space or proximity to represent these different parts and how they relate to each other. And each part is treated as a guest. Do you see that idea? I remember when I was training somebody to do psychodrama leading, the client, the protagonist in the story, wanted to get rid of their anger. And the therapist took up that charge and was going to help this person get rid of the anger because, of course, according to this individual, anger was destroying their life and their relationships. And I stepped in as the supervisor and I said, let's just slow down a little bit. Let's talk about how the anger also is saving you from something else, maybe from feeling vulnerable or being victimized. I once was sitting in and watching somebody do some work around their eating disorder. And this person had been in therapy for quite some time. And everybody in the circle wanted to talk to this individual about how the eating disorder was destroying their lives, right? And they'd heard that hundreds of times. But instead, we decided as a group that we would talk to the eating disorder and thank it for the things that it was giving to this individual, how it was protecting them. Do you see how that can shift the entire psychological journey of somebody? You can honor it, hold it, give it a break, give it, fire it, tell it to retire, that you don't need it anymore. You have a completely different, you're not at war with yourself anymore. You're working with yourself, very, very literally. So when somebody comes to me in therapy with a symptom that is troubling, my thought is, let's first understand what that need is that it's meeting. Simple as that, not too complex. But to hold that, especially as a parent, can be terrifying. We don't want our loved one's substance use disorder to get any positive credit for anything. We fear that if we give it the kind of attention that I'm describing, that it will take over, when in reality, that's not the way that it works. It is when it becomes an exiled part of you, a part of you that you despise, that it actually swallows you whole. Participants in this particular exercise are prompted to invite their identified parts to the party. This can involve visualizing or even role-playing these parts, sometimes assigning the various members of the group to these parts. You be my guilt. You be my hero self. You be my victim. You create a dialogue among them. You begin to learn about them and how they serve you. After the dialogue, participants are invited to reflect upon those parts, how they serve you. I don't like it when people say, even one of my favorite teachers, Alan Watts, has a quote about how nothing can be changed by worrying about it, right? No amount of fear can be helped is going to make a difference. No matter how much we fear something, it's not going to make any difference. No matter how anxious we are, it's not going to make a difference. And my thought is, well, that's not true at all. Fear gives me the energy to fight or to run away if I need to. Anxiety for me, the way that anxiety serves me is if I worry about something, I use my brain and I think and I think and I think and I think. I wake up in the middle of the night when I'm anxious for hours and I think. And at times, at least historically, I found that I can think of a workaround, a solution. So sometimes my anxiety motivates me to study for a test, to stay awake for 3 hours in the middle of the night. That's the upside of my anxiety. The downside is not getting enough sleep leads to more anxiety, ruins my health, puts a strain on my heart, changes my practices with diet. It comes at a great cost. What does alcohol do for somebody? Well, it takes away their fear. It's liquid courage. What does an eating disorder do for somebody? It signals to the world that something's not working, that there's a part of me that is starving to death, or that there's a part of me that is overeating, and that part of me is saying that I need something that the environment hasn't up to this point given me. That's how we begin to shift our relationships with ourselves. But we have to do battle with fear because we have been told, that's why we call them demons. We have been taught that they are demons so that it would scare us. But they were never meant to be something to be afraid of. They were meant to be something that we can understand. The participants in this exercise by Satir reflect upon their experience, discussing the insights that they gain, understanding how it can apply, how it comes up in their daily lives. The benefits of the parts party is that it gains clarity over the internal conflicts and motivation. Why do I both feel anger towards you and gratitude? It fosters self-acceptance. Here's the thing. Self-compassion is the magic wand. I mean, that's probably not a great way to say it because it comes after years of practice and something we never completely perfect. But if I could just give one thing to people, it would be self-compassion. Because what does self-compassion do? Like this parts party that Satir set up, it fosters self-acceptance and compassion for the aspects of themselves. If you have self-compassion, you know yourself better. Your self-awareness is only as expansive as your self-compassion. Because if you don't have self-compassion and you judge yourself, you won't be able to see and look at the parts of yourself. You'll deny that they exist. And in doing so, they kind of run the show. Understanding your parts helps improve communication with other people. If I understand that my wife has a part of her that we might call the scarcity mindset because she grew up poor. This isn't my wife's story. I'm just using it as an example. But let's say she has that. Then when she overreacts to the new guitar I just bought, for example, yells at me, gets really upset, I can have compassion for her because I understand that scarcity mindset lives inside of her because of her trauma. And if she can see that, then she understands that her explosive behavior at me comes from a trauma. And when somebody turns from anger and rage and attacking to I'm scared, compassion comes effortlessly. So understanding parts, using parts is a great way to develop self-compassion, relationship intelligence, emotional intelligence about oneself. Speaking of IFS, internal family systems, at its core, this is from the book No Bad Parts by Dick Schwartz. At its core, IFS is a loving way of relating internally to your parts and externally to people in your life. So that in that sense, IFS is a life practice as well. It's something you can do on a daily, moment-to-moment basis at any time by yourself or with others. It is really about de-shaming the human experience, not just for you, but for the people that you are close to. So that when somebody has a quote-unquote trauma response, right? In Al-Anon, they say if it's hysterical, that is, if your response is overblown in relationship to the situation that's presenting itself, right? If it's hysterical, they say, it's historical. I learned about your trauma not because we go back and listen to the stories of your childhood, but I learned about your trauma because the way that you react to life, to people. That is how trauma reveals itself, is in our day-to-day reactions. And then as you become more aware of that trauma response, you actually can look back with new eyes and new ears. I haven't discovered any lost memories of my childhood, but it almost feels like that at times because as I have expanded my self-compassion, my awareness through psychotherapy, I look back on my childhood and the perspective is so different than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. It's so fundamentally different that it is almost like it is a recovered memory. But I didn't really forget that. It's just that what it means, what it symbolizes in my life has changed so dramatically because of my awareness. Now, specifically with IFS, what they're talking about are the managers. I'll go over kind of the parts that they talk about. The managers are the protectors of the system. They attempt to keep the person in control of every situation and relationship in order to protect them from feeling hurt or rejected. Words and roles like controller, striver, caretaker, judge, passive, pessimist, planner, self-critic are all aspects of this manager part of us, parts of us. In Jungian therapy, in Freudian therapy, we would call this the ego. The part of ourself that wants to be in control, that thinks it's running the show. Then we have the firefighters. The firefighters are the parts of us that protect the system, but act after exiles. I'll get to that in a moment. After exiles, the parts of us that we shove into the shadow are upset to either soothe that part of us or to distract that part, distract us from that part. Any activity can be used to get away from exiles, but common ones include addictions, workaholism, exercise, video game playing, and more. Binge eating, suicidality, self-harm, violence, dissociation, distraction, obsessive behavior, compulsive behavior, fantasy or rage. All of these symptoms, if you will, serve to either soothe or to move away from the parts of ourselves that we have been taught to not love, taught to hate. In psychoanalytic theory, right, the original therapy, these were referred to as symptoms or complexes in Jungian terms. The exiles hold painful emotions. They're the parts of us that have been isolated from the conscious self. If my needs, as they were when I was young, this is the true part of an accurate example. If my needs were too overwhelming for my mother and brought up her a sense of inadequacy and shame and overwhelmed, as they did, then she would tell me I was being dramatic. Specifically, my mother used the phrase melodramatic for some reason. And that shaming message was intended to shrink me down to size, to shrink my needs to a level that could be more manageable, that would not trigger my mother. I've done that. Just the other night, I did that with my wife. My wife did something in co-parenting that triggered this old wound of mine. And instead of simply saying to her, I'm not okay with what you just said, I tried to shame her and insult her about it, which of course didn't go very well for either one of us. And we had a good long talk about it. And it was painful to be accountable for that, to own it. The exiles hold painful emotions that have been isolated from the conscious self for the protection of the system or for the part's safety. They become increasingly extreme, right? Jung and Freud explained that things that are put into the closet mutate, become darker, become overwhelming. They become increasingly extreme in an effort to be cared for and share their story. We just said to a couple of the people at the intensive this week, I just did, as they were having a dialogue with their inner child. The inner child would say on a couple of occasions, if you don't remember me, if you don't listen to me, I will screw up your life so bad that you'll have no choice but to pay attention to me. That's what the struggling, exiled child does for us. These carry burdens from being wounded. Things like dependency, shame, worthlessness, fear, terror, grief, loss, loneliness, neediness, pain. These are the names of the exiled parts of ourselves. And then, of course, excuse me. And then, of course, there's the self. This is the core of who we are, the center of us. When it's differentiated, it acts as an active, compassionate leader. Calm, curious, compassionate, connected, confident, creative, courageous, and clear. In the journey of the heroic parent, I explained that effective parenting, that healing in parenting, doesn't ensure that you have children that are well behaved, but it gives you a sense of calm, of curiosity, of compassion, of clarity, of courage, right? That is the reward of healthy parenting, not well-behaved children. In marriage, it's the same thing. You become your authentic self. You become who you were before people told you who you should be. And everything else makes sense. Relationships that are meant to work, work. Relationships that aren't meant to work are those that you have to let go of and grieve. In psychoanalytic theory, the first therapy, this was called the self or the soul, which again is a metaphor. I was taught in my religious tradition that the soul was this ghost-like part of us. But again, I put to you that was a misinterpretation of it. Some of you might not know, but the word psyche actually means soul in Greek. That's what it is. It is the part of us, the wise part of us, sometimes thought to be the whole of us, all that we are, including all of these various parts. Sometimes it's thought of as the observer. You are not your fear, you are that which observes your fear. Sometimes the self is understood as the wise mind, the wisest, most knowing part of us. And all of those in some ways are compatible. So the internal family systems, the more modern American technique that is becoming popular, is a very accessible version of this historical parts work from attachment theory and analytical theory, from the original therapy, from those who invented the idea of talk therapy. Dick Schwartz said, we often find that the harder we try to get rid of emotions and thoughts, the stronger they become. This is because parts like people fight back against being shamed or exiled. Carl Rogers, an expert on child development and analytically informed child development, human development, said this. He said, the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. Leonard Cohen said, if you don't become the ocean, you'll be seasick every day. You have to get in alignment with yourself, not at war with yourself. In fact, the wars that we have outside of us are merely a reflection of our internal world, whether that be on a political grand scale or in our fights in our conflicts and our relationships. Learning to love your horrible, rotten self. Even the most destructive parts, according to IFS, even the most destructive parts have protective intentions. Parts of us are often frozen in the past, tied to their traumas, when their extreme roles and coping ways of coping were necessary. And so as we wake up, we might have an urge to punish ourselves for the less evolved version of ourselves, the less conscious version of ourselves. But these theories that I'm talking about, this idea that I'm talking about tonight, invites compassion. Finally, when they trust it's safe to step out of their roles, they become highly valuable to the system. That's the same idea that I teach all the time, that your wound is right next to your greatest gift. And this is the quote that I was alluding to earlier by Charles Bukowski. Don't fight your demons. Your demons are there to teach you lessons. Sit down with them. Sit down with your demons and have a drink and a chat and learn their names and talk about the burns on their fingers and the scratches on their ankles. Some of them are very nice. Tennessee Williams said, if I got rid of my demons, I'd lose my angels, because they're the same thing. In the movie Frozen, just to illustrate one example, this is not an accident. It was the thing that caused her to be exiled. The fact that she almost killed her sister with this magical frozen power that she had, right? Her parents got very upset. It's dangerous. They scolded her. She ended up running away and living in an ice castle, which is all a metaphor for the exile. That's what it is. And yet later on, when the village was being threatened, the kingdom was being threatened, who saved it? And with what did they save the kingdom? It was her. She came back. And the very thing that caused her the most pain was the thing that saved the community. That is true over and over again. Batman is Batman because of the worst thing happening to him. Alan Watts said that when you find out that there was never anything on the dark side to be afraid of, nothing is left but love. Campbell said it's the cave that you fear to enter that holds the treasure you seek. And in IFS, the way that they say it is, the big conclusion, according to IFS here, is that parts are not what they have been commonly thought to be. They're not cognitive adaptations or sinful impulses. Instead, parts are sacred spiritual beings, and they deserve to be treated as such. That's a complete transformation of consciousness. As Campbell said, the purpose of myths and stories are to facilitate a transformation of consciousness, which means it's not about symptom reduction or changing an idea. It's about a completely new way of looking at the world. One of the things that happens in IFS is he makes a distinguish between blending or integrating. And I think it's semantics in a large degree. In IFS, he says, blending refers to a state where individuals' protected parts, often referred to as managers or firefighters, become dominant, overshadowing the self, which is the core, right? We know our positive, capable parts. I know that part of me. I know those parts of me too. I know the firefighters and managers, and sometimes that's all I want to be. But these parts can overshadow the self, the vulnerable, compassionate, soft parts of you. This blending, in other ways, when he talks about blending, he's talking about ignoring the parts, of imagining. One of the things that I teach in psychotherapy is that one of the greatest risks in psychotherapy is thinking to yourself, I can cure myself. You are not a disease. It's not about curing you. It's about understanding yourself. See, when the alcoholic goes to an AA meeting 30 years after he or she has had a drink and says, hi, my name is George, or my name is Susan, I'm an alcoholic. What they are doing is they're saying, this part still is in me. I have to be aware of it. I, Brad Reedy, I have to be aware of my my narcissistic parts, my depressive parts. I have to be aware of those parts. If I don't keep my eye on that, it'll sneak up behind me and take over. That's what Dick Schwartz was warning against. IFS emphasizes recognizing when blending occurs, when we go to this place of denial. We deny that the shadow exists. We deny that the exiles exist. This is a point that oftentimes people, like I've been saying lately, therapy is not about becoming so good that you are beyond reproach. It's not about getting gooder. Therapy is a process of kind of accepting the humiliations, as Jung says over and over again. As my therapist says, avoid therapy at all costs, because in psychotherapy, the news just gets worse and worse. Psychoanalytic theories of integration typically revolve around the idea of unifying conflicting drives. It's not about denying them, but understanding them. And how can I use them as allies and resources? This process of integration involves bringing unconscious material into consciousness, allowing individuals to confront and understand their inner conflicts. Integration in this context is about harmony, harmonizing these conflicting elements to form a cohesive idea of the self. You are all of it. You are not the prince. You are not the dragon. You are not the villain. You're not the child who needs to be rescued. You are all of those things. In IFS, it is said, the way we relate to our parts translates directly in how we relate to the people when they resemble our parts. James Hollis says, and of which I often quote, the truth about intimate relationships is that they can never be any better than the relationship that we have with ourselves. And finally, to the therapists that are listening, IFS is a creative and clearly outlined conceptualization at looking at the different energies or parts that operate largely unconsciously. But be sure, and this is true for those of you who are seeking it out, if you want to try out, I've had lots of clients try IFS. It's a wonderful tool, but it's one of many tools. It is a way of conceptualizing and understanding the human experience. And for a therapist, be sure to not let your theory eclipse the client. My therapist says the reason that she doesn't join a psychoanalytic group is because she doesn't want to become part of another religion or another cult. Right? Hold the theories lightly, like Jung said. Master all the techniques, learn all the theories. But in the end, just be a human soul touching another human soul. Be ready to and willing to drop your approach, your technique, when the client is not responding. And always be aware that one of the most insidious forms of resistance in clients is to swallow whole what you have to say and to try to please you, to try to make you feel like you're a good therapist. I cannot tell you how many times that I have people tell me stories where they finally agreed with the therapist just so the therapist could feel good about themselves, just to stop fighting with the therapist, which ideally wouldn't even come into conflict. So what are the take-home messages of parts work? Whatever works for you, however it helps you to think about yourself, to understand yourself. Use it. Compassion is a better motivator for change than fear and punishment. Now, I will tell you, shame and fear and punishment are very effective in the short run. We will do amazing, difficult things from shame or from fear. But in the long run, the cost to the psyche, the cost to the soul is just too great. Listening to yourself is a pathway to greater peace, clarity, and confidence, and often results in the reduction of our symptoms. This is something that we work with our therapist on this. And in many cases, we lead and the therapist walks beside us, sometimes following behind us. Does the model of the therapist eclipse the client? Are they so attached to the model that everything has to be understood in their framework? Or are they flexible enough to use whatever feels most comfortable for you to use? And then, of course, all of this is just a way of using kind of guided imagery internally to understand our unconscious or our subconscious parts. And the most important message is, to me, understanding the moving energies in ourselves. Even though we have been taught to fear or to even hate some of those parts, is the only way for lasting peace. I hope that's helpful. Gives you some sense of what we're working with. All right, like I said at the beginning, my 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity of You, you can find them on Audible or Amazon. The next Finding You, we have 1 spot left in our September Finding You. We have a couple of spots left in our online Finding You mid-September. And then, of course, October, November, December, the beginning of the month, there are intensives that have spots available. If you're looking for a coach, if you're looking for a therapist who teaches and understands what I'm talking about today, go to our website or email us at info@findingyou.com. For inquiries, for private intensives, to find out about our alumni support groups, go to our website. If you want to join me in New York for a week, 5 days, 6 days at the Omega Institute, only for $500, which is an amazing offer, go to the eomega.org website. That is eomega.org. Click on the workshops tab and then on the Audacity of You and join me in New York. Next week, I'll be talking on Tuesday. I'm going to be doing 2 broadcasts next week, an open forum, so you can bring your live questions. You could submit questions in advance. Any questions you submit through the email info@findingyouprograms.com will go at the top of the queue, or you can attend. If you're a member of the Inner Circle, you can attend live and dialogue and ask questions as I go. So Tuesday, I'll be talking about symptoms and becoming the authentic self, kind of a continuation of tonight's broadcast. That's Tuesday, August 26th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. And then August 28th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, I'll be doing that live Ask Me Anything broadcast. So I look forward to that. All right, folks, welcome to the Inner Circle Finding You members tonight. Good to see your names. Some of you I don't recognize, so it's good to see you. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. And on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thank you for showing up to these. Thank you for listening, because it makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next week, next Tuesday. Take care. Bye-bye.